Hey everybody, it's Chris, and today I am hanging out with Dr. Patrick Quillin. He's an internationally recognized expert in the area of nutrition and cancer. He has 30 years experience as a clinical nutritionist, 10 of which were spent as the vice president of nutrition for Cancer Treatment Centers of America, where he worked with thousands of cancer patients in a hospital setting. Dr. Quillin earned his bachelor's, master's, and doctorate degrees in nutrition, and is a registered and licensed dietitian and a certified nutrition specialist with the American College of Nutrition. His 17 books have sold over 2 million copies, including Beating Cancer with Nutrition and 12 Keys to a Healthier Cancer Patient. He also edited the textbook Adjuvant Nutrition in Cancer Treatment and organized the first, second, and third international symposia on adjuvant nutrition in cancer treatment. His website is gettinghealthier.com. Gettinghealthier.com, easy to remember. When I first stumbled across Dr. Patrick Quillin a few years ago, and somehow I came across his book. It might have been on Amazon or somewhere, Beating Cancer with Nutrition. I was like, who's this guy? and I bought the book, and I was like, wow, this guy's great. And then we ended up meeting in person at a live event a few years later, and I've been a fan ever since. We've spoken at multiple events together. And Dr. Quillin, it's just great to see you. Great to have you on.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your viewers and listeners. Chris, you've done an incredible job, a voice of sanity in a sea of insanity. 12 or 14 million cancer patients in the pipeline in America today, and at less than 1% are getting what I would call true comprehensive cancer treatment, such as you advocate in your book and in my book. So let's see if we can share some rational approaches to cancer treatment and prevention in your show.
Yes, sir. I'm excited to hear what you have to say, and we're both on the same team trying to move the needle forward, trying to reach more people, trying to empower patients with actionable information that they can use to help themselves. And, there's a lot of places we could start, but I guess the easiest place to start is at what point in your life, or what happened in your life to make you, I guess that's the spark that happened in your life where you realized there's something wrong with cancer treatment, something's missing. Obviously, you had studied nutrition maybe before you got into cancer, but what was going on in your life around that time?
Well, I'll make it very brief, Chris, less than 30 seconds. But as a child, I was always interested in what makes it tick. What's under the hood? How does this thing work? 4 years in a row, my parents gave me a watch when I was a kid, and I took them apart. Wanted to see what was inside. Couldn't get them back together, but I did take them apart. 1 year when I was about 10, I went out on a rainy day, and I wasn't nothing malicious, but I took my father's razor and cut open an earthworm to say, what's inside here? How does this tick? And from that, I went to Notre Dame for 2 years and studied pre-med and realized that drugs and surgery, while they are useful in emergency room, do not change the underlying cause of a disease. So I transferred, ended up in bachelor's degree at San Diego State, nutrition, and nutrition makes sense. And so I marched on. I taught college nutrition. I worked at La Costa, the Scripps Clinic, worked with the USDA, et cetera, and finally found probably the most disenfranchised, the most neglected group of patients in America are cancer patients. When you talk about heart disease, some of the most noteworthy physicians who advocate nutrition were cardiologists, Mehmet Oz, Dean Ornish, I could go on. Many of them were cardiologists because they realized open heart surgery doesn't cure anything. I need to get into this patient's lifestyle and diet. However, cancer is a whole different story. What you have is oncologists, about 20,000 board-certified oncologists in America, and they're basically trained in maximum sublethal chemo and radiation. We're going to kill the cancer and hopefully not you. And they ignore nutrition with the attitude of, at best, nutrition is useless, and at worst, it's neutralizing the benefits of chemo and radiation. So the 14 million cancer patients in this country suffer greatly, and 40% of them actually die of malnutrition. So 1989, I moved in with cancer treatment centers and realized that I could do a great deal of good there. The patients were eager for knowledge. It's fascinating, Chris, that you tell somebody who was 30 years old that maybe having 6 Cokes a day and being 50 pounds overweight isn't good for them, and they say, call me later. They think they're invincible, immortal. But you get someone who is 60 with a diagnosis of stage 4 cancer, and you've got maybe a year to live, suddenly they're very attentive. So they're good people, and I found it a very receptive audience, and I've helped a lot of them with my books, and so have you. So it's been a very rewarding past 30 years in focusing on nutrition and cancer.
It's really interesting to me that you had that revelation so young. I mean, as a pre-med student, I mean, I feel like that is something that pre-med students might have a revelation of today with the widespread knowledge of healthy eating, organic food, all this kind of stuff, plant-based eating. But, and this is not a knock on your age, but this was a long time ago when
Yeah.
you were in pre-med.
Yeah.
How did you arrive at this conclusion? What was the turnoff? Because most people in college, they're told something and they're like, okay, this is how it is. I'm just going to keep, trying to memorize as much as they tell me and just get to the next course, right?
Yeah. Well, it's a revelation, an epiphany, some sort of. For me, it was always basic logic. Drugs will palliate symptoms, and that's wonderful. Many people need them, but they don't change the underlying cause of the disease. And a strange example, let's say you're driving, you're in your car and the red light comes on your dashboard, and it's annoying. And you say, well, I'm going to put some tape over it. Now you don't have to see the red light, but the problem is still there. And most medication does exactly that. It will palliate the symptoms. It's not annoying right now, but the problem escalates. Basically what you put into the equipment, what we are is what we have consumed over a course of a lifetime. I've had the benefit of having many mentors. Jeff Bland, for instance, is a very good guy, a bright PhD, functional medicine, one of the co-founders. And Jeff told me he was in medical school, actually in an MD, PhD program, and they said, you ask too many questions. I don't think medicine is for you. So he finished his PhD and has made a big impact, more so than many medical doctors. Point is, I'm not against medicine. I am in favor of using the right tool at the right time. So for instance, think of a toolkit. You're bringing it throughout your house trying to fix things. If the only thing you had was a hammer, you can't fix a lot of things. And so nutrition is one of those important tools in your toolkit. And unfortunately, many patients in America are severely malnourished. And the main tool that people should use, frontline therapy, is nutrition. We're talking about excess, deficiency, or imbalance of any given nutrient can lead to an assortment of diseases. And what they used to look at is frank clinical deficiencies. So nutrition was built on the back of scurvy. Basically, in the 1700s, sailors would sail the world and they'd eat nothing but dried meat and dried bread, and half of them would die from scurvy, which is a vitamin C deficiency. And from that, the nutritionist said, well, unless we can see a blatant, immediate, life-threatening disease, there is no malnutrition. Not true. Now what we know is, in your case, for instance, you developed cancer in your 20s. It was probably 10 years of bad eating that developed the cancer, not a day or a month. Smoking, it takes 30 years to develop lung cancer. Malnutrition, it probably takes 10 or 20 years of bad eating before you develop a disease. So the old paradigm was we have to see an immediate, blatant, frank, life-threatening disease before we call it malnutrition. Not true. There are subtle and many stages before you get to that life-threatening disease. Cancer is one of them. Many people with cancer actually are suffering from a variety of nutritional problems, and I am on board with you. Plant-based diet is where we start. We can discuss any or all of it. You're the conductor here.
I would like to discuss all of it as much as we can cram in. But
Me too.
Before we do, I would love to know, you were at Cancer Treatment Centers of America for 10 years, and I would love to know, you're on the front lines. You're seeing patients every day. You're learning a lot, and I'd love to know what some of the biggest takeaways, the revelations, the eye-opening stuff that you learned being on the front lines of a major cancer center. And it doesn't matter that it was Cancer Treatment Centers. It could have been anywhere.
Let me start with the propaganda, brainwashing, or mindset that is put forth in the American public. So 330 million Americans. Right now, we're dealing with this COVID pandemic. In fact, what they have found of the 200,000 deaths, 90% of them were old and very sick. They had an average of 3 comorbidities. And what they found is that using zinc, vitamin C, vitamin D, iodine could rescue many of these people, even though they were very sick and very old. So now I come back to the business of nutrition in the American public. What we are taught is eat whatever you want, which is immediate gratification, and much of us are like a moth to a flame. You go down an entire aisle in the grocery store and it's nothing but sugary breakfast cereals. You go down another entire aisle and it's nothing but soft drinks, another aisle and it's nothing but chips. This is all death on a stick. But we're brainwashed into thinking, eat whatever tastes good, and when you get sick, you go to the doctor and do exactly what they tell you. So we have this immediate gratification from food, drugs, alcohol, tobacco, and then when you get sick, you take these medications. Let me give you some numbers. Junk food, alcohol, tobacco is about a $1 trillion a year business in America alone. Drugs are about a $440 billion a year industry. So the bizarre paradigm that's used about government is, what if we paid people to put up this building with windows in it, and then we pay another group of people to throw rocks and break the windows, and then we pay another group of people to repair the windows? Does that sound like an economy to you? And what we do in this country, we spend $1 trillion. The biggest advertisers on TV are drugs and junk food and diet weight loss programs. So do you think the TV is ever going to have a program like what you and I are talking about, in which we can say preemptive, proactive, preventive? You don't have to get that stage 4 something. So we have a mindset among the American public that says, do what you're told, eat what you like, go to the doctor, take the drugs, and everything's going to be fine. And it isn't. And that's where, now I'm going to answer your question when you said, what were your experiences, front line? When you're in a cancer hospital, many of these patients that I worked with were end stage, poor prognosis, refractory. They had already failed several therapies. And they're looking at me saying, why didn't somebody tell me this stuff years ago? So there was a disbelief. Sometimes they got angry, sometimes depressed. Many of them got motivated, and like you, they got well. So my whole message is one of empowerment. What I want to do is educate, empower, enlighten people, and I'd like to change the. Right now we have an 18-wheeler, a giant semi-truck going down the Cajon Pass with the brakes shot and the lights out, and that's American healthcare. Healthcare in America is $3.7 trillion a year. And instead of asking, how can we lower that budget by improving our health through preventive measures, they're all saying, who's going to pay for it? Because it keeps going up about 10 to 15% per year. Bernie Sanders says, well, it should all be free. You should be able to be 100 pounds overweight. We'll take care of your diabetic care. We need to be a little bit more involved, self-reliant, personally responsible. So my revelations in the cancer hospital were, number one, that oncologists, and we had good ones. I mean, these were open-minded, as good as it gets. But you got 20,000 board-certified oncologists, and they are trained or brainwashed with the theory that you take the patient to the therapeutic brink of death, and then you rescue them. And the hope is that we're not going to have too much collateral damage. But you look at the list of side effects from chemotherapy, it's nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, hair loss. You're going to lose all of your 3 major cells in the blood. So you got red cell, white cell, platelets. All of those are depressed to the point where you won't clot, you're anemic. Those are the known side effects of chemo, and the oncologists who distribute that have the audacity to say, don't take any nutrition or it might reduce the effectiveness of my chemotherapy, which is some sort of sardonic humor at this point. But my message is, we can do something about this. My book, Beating Cancer with Nutrition, has sold 500,000 copies. I have had so many people come up to me when I speak at conferences with their dog-eared copy of the book and say, thank you. Thank you. You saved my life. And I don't hear anybody. I am very humble about this. The good Lord put some knowledge and some logic into my brain. I've had the ability to write books and spread a good message. But at this point, I think I'm running at 680 reviews on Amazon and 4.5 stars. And you've got 500,000 followers. And I am so supportive of what you're doing. But there is this reality orientation that goes on in a cancer hospital, where you realize the 20,000 board certified oncologists basically scare their patients into saying, if you don't do what I tell you, you're going to die soon. And so there is this almost a bullying that goes on. And then most of those oncologists tell the patient, nutrition has nothing to do with it, and don't take any nutrition supplements. And I could tell you endless stories of patients who I did phone consultations with. I would say, do this. Their oncologist said, don't. And they're dead right on the prescribed 18 months after diagnosis or something. So I'm all about empowerment and optimism and upbeat, and I think we can make this thing move in the right direction, Chris.
What do you say the difference is between the patients that listen to your advice, that follow your advice, and those who don't? Because there's a clear difference, right?
Yeah, definitely. There is a fantasy about those who don't listen. There is this fantasy that I can eat whatever I want, and I'll do what the doctor tells me, and they will cure me. And it is a surrealistic. There's a difference between optimism and inability to accept realism. So, for instance, in the oncology literature, there is a book called the SEER data, S-E-E-R, Surveillance, Epidemiology, End Result. And what it is millions of cancer patients have gone before you. And stage 1, 2, 3, and 4, we can look into the book and say, you've got stage 3B bladder cancer, and the odds are 50-50 you're going to make it to 2 years. And that's what they'll tell the patient. And a lot of these patients have this naive assumption that they're going to be the exception to the rule. You think about it. You go into a quick trip, one of these gas stations, and somebody's buying a case of beer, a carton of cigarettes, and 10 lottery tickets. Now think about the odds there. The odds are pretty good the cigarettes are going to kill you. The odds are very bad you're going to win the lottery. And these people have a fantasy about statistics and odds. So the patients who did not listen, I found, had sort of this naive reliance on medicine. Instead of looking, the obvious logic is, look, the doc just told you, you got a 20% chance of living 5 years. You better listen to me. And the ones who do have this more of a proactive stance, self-reliant, they're going to take care of themselves. They say, I want to be involved in this. And what I find, Chris, is that cancer treatment in America is not unlike going through a car wash. You sit in the car and everything's done to you. You don't do anything. And that's what cancer patients think about. Somebody's going to do this to me, and I'll end up at the other end of the car wash well, healthy. Too often that's not the case. 5-year survival for cancer patients is not much different than it was 50 years ago when we started the war on cancer. So that naive reliance on medicine leads to many of the downfalls. The other is the people who become empowered say, I want to be a part of my recovery. I like the sense of being proactive. Those are the ones who do better. And I don't say that nutrition cures cancer by itself. What I do say is that a well-nourished cancer patient can better manage the disease and the therapies. And you can improve quality and quantity of life and chances for a complete remission. And the evidence is overwhelmingly in favor of those statements.
Absolutely agree with that. Thank you for sharing that, because it's so important. I in many years of introspection and talking with survivors, and this is something I talk about in my first book, but I realized, there is a mindset that survivors have, and I call it the beat cancer mindset.
Yeah.
And those are the ones like you described who are willing to take full responsibility for their health. They're willing to do whatever it takes, and whatever it takes doesn't mean the strongest chemo drug. It means they're willing to change their life.
Right.
They're willing to change, and they don't want to be a passenger. They want to be a driver in their healing journey. And so that's critically important. Did you ever find yourself at odds with oncologists over patient care? Like, for example, a patient would come to you and say this thing, well, my doctor says I can eat whatever I want.
Right. No, definitely. The best oncologist will say, go see Quillin and don't tell me what he said to you. The worst would say, I don't want you to follow that advice because here's the dogma. Here is the gospel according to oncology, which is that nutrients will interfere with chemo or radiation. And that is so far wrong. There have been a number of reviews of the literature. Chuck Simone, MD, master's degree, Keith Block. There's been several reviews of the literature that say that nutrition augments conventional cancer treatment. But back to the oncologist, I'd rather not spend too much of our time picking on the oncologist because think about this. They are following what they were taught. This is where, imagine if you completed the priesthood and then someone came up to you and said, none of that's right. You need to be an atheist. And that's almost the paradigm shift that oncologists have to go through in order to embrace nutrition. For instance, Andy Weil, he is an MD, Harvard undergrad, Harvard Med. When he finished med school, he said, I wouldn't want to be treated by the doctor they trained me to be. So he started wandering around, driving here and there in a broken down car, had to get some parts in Tucson, Arizona. And they said, what are you doing? Driving in Mexico. What's your background? I'm an MD. MD where? Harvard. And you're doing this? He said, I can't stand traditional medicine. So it's difficult for someone to go through 12 years of training and then turn their back on it. And that's where your standard oncologist is. However, what we need is a partnership. What I'm looking for in America is the ability for docs to recognize their areas of expertise and their limitations. Stay in your lane is the latest phrase. So the medical doctor can treat all sorts of side effects from the cancer, the pain, the nausea, the sleeplessness. They can give targeted therapies. They can use fractionated chemo. They can use intensity modulated radiation, which is more of targeted. It's using a rifle instead of a hand grenade, and that's fine. But let me help change the underlying cause of the disease. Nobody with cancer is suffering from a deficiency of adriamycin. That's not their problem.
True. That's very true. I appreciate that. I think it's good for folks to understand that there is a large information gap between medical education and the nutritional science literature. In other words, it's not covered at all in med school.
True.
And you mentioned 12 years of training plus all those years of practice, right? Before a doctor actually establishes themselves in a lucrative career, right? So you get all this training and then they start actually going to work. And so, 15 to 20 years of a medical doctor's life is invested to really become a successful doctor. And at that point, man, they're trapped in a system that pays them really well, and it doesn't matter what the results are.
One of the first physicians who started using nutrition as part of cancer treatment was Max Gerson. He used as a plant-based diet, he used some supplements, a whole variety of therapies. But Max Gerson was told, get out of this country. Nutrition has nothing to do with preventing or treating cancer. And he said, but look at all these patients that get well. And they said, freak occurrence. Then I had the great privilege in working at cancer treatment centers. They said, prove it. Show our oncologists that this works. So I organized 3 international symposia. We brought in an average of 40 of the world's best experts to teach us, and an average of 400 students, who many of them were just as bright as the teachers that were on the stage. So 400 docs in the audience, 40 docs on the stage. And what they did is they went through these elegant explanations of how nutrition changes the way the body works. So this is not random. This is not folklore, folk medicine. You can talk about apoptosis or apoptosis, programmed cell death. There are nutrients, ellagic acid in dark berries that induces programmed cell death in cancer. You can talk about fish oil, icosapentaenoic acid, how it influences prostaglandins and how it changes the immune system and the stickiness of cells so that cancer cannot go out and metastasize by sticking to the lining of blood vessels. You can talk about DNA repair, DNA polymerase. I mean, these docs were brilliant in explaining this is how nutrition works. We know the molecular mechanisms. We know it works. But one of the problems right now, Chris, is we've got this $3.7 trillion a year medical industrial boondoggle. and it's built for illness and patching people up. It has very little to do with health care or insurance. And so getting that thing derailed or in a more favorable direction will be difficult. But I have every confidence that we're going to do it, and it's going to start at the grass level, grassroots. You and I are doing it. You're not going to get it from the American Medical Association, from the Food and Drug Association, from the American Dietetic. They're not going to do it. It's going to be people like you and I who have enough people who have recovered from cancer, who then start having their own little blogs and chats and groups in their house, and people start awakening to the fact that there are serious limitations to traditional oncology.
Well, we've been dangling the carrot long enough. Let's get granular here. Let's talk about details on anti-cancer nutrition. What are the best foods to eat and why?
If I may give us a 30,000-foot overview, what we have is there's genetics and then there's epigenetics. And this is a very important distinction. You look something like your ancestors. That's genetics. That's great. Epigenetics is above genetics. And what we have proven beyond argument is that there's epigenetic factors that change the way your body works. There have been many studies looking at this. One of them was Dean Ornish. He took 30 prostate cancer patients. They did needle assay of the prostate gland. So they looked at the DNA that was in this prostate cancer, and then he gave them his lifestyle program, 3 months. Plant-based diet, meditation, social involvement, exercise, yoga, whatever, his lifestyle program. And within 3 months, there were 500 changes in the DNA of these cancer cells. So the prostate gland was already re-regulating itself back to normal just based upon lifestyle. So what are those 6 factors? That's in my book, 12 Keys to a Healthier Cancer Patient. Those 6 factors are attitude, nutrition, toxins, energy alignment, exercise, and the microbiome in the gut. So those 6 factors make up epigenetics. Now, from those, let's dive into nutrition. Plant-based diet, absolutely. Is vegan necessary? No. As a matter of fact, there are some nutrients in small amounts of animal food that I encourage. We could talk about carnitine that is in some meats, coenzyme Q, B12. There's a number of nutrients. So what I recommend is a quasi-vegetarian diet based upon the Mediterranean lifestyle. So what we're looking at is the 9 food groups that make up the bulk of your plate is fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts, seeds, mushroom, seaweed, and medicinal herbs. So these are things like turmeric, garlic, onion, cayenne. So those 9 food groups make up the bulk of your diet, and those are plant-based. And then small amounts of grass-fed beef, of free-range chicken eggs, of some yogurt. Small amounts of animal-based food is what I recommend. And many people have recovered with this program.
Now, when you say small amounts, do you mean what percentage of calories are you talking about?
I'm talking about 10%.
10%.
So a large percentage of your diet, the vast majority, is plant-based. But if you look at, for instance, the Mediterranean diet, which is the best studied diet on the planet Earth, there was a study done in Europe where they looked at, I think it was 12,000 people, and found that following this diet led to a 50% overall reduction in mortality. As I mentioned, there are some nutrients in some animal food that I feel are probably essential. I mentioned those, don't want to be redundant, but plant-based is crucial. And this is where we think, well, what's in plants? Let's talk about bioflavonoids, carotenoids, sodium-potassium ratio, fiber. Let's just stop there for a second. One of those 6 factors, the vectors that I mentioned, that's part of epigenetics, is the microbiome. That's the 100 trillion cells in our gut, and they are fed by what's left over from our diet. So fiber, the nutrition scientists back in the 40s and 50s said, since you cannot digest and absorb it, we're going to take it out of your diet. You're welcome. And from that came a plethora of diseases of civilization, starting with constipation, heart disease, obesity, diabetes, etc. But that fiber, because it's indigestible, and because it feeds the 100 trillion cells in our gut, and they are largely responsible for our immune system. The whole business of the microbiome almost defies the imagination. There's crosstalk between these microorganisms. They're generating vitamins. They're stimulating the immune system. They're repairing the lining of the intestine. So the magic there starts with a plant-based diet.
You know, what you're saying is right in line with what I talk about all the time, and even in my book too, is that, you know, the healthiest populations around the world with the lowest rates of cancer eat a plant-based diet, on average about 95% plant-based. So some are eating a little more, and some are eating less than 5% of calories from from animal foods. But the majority of, you know, voluminous food that they're eating is from the plant kingdom, because we have all these wonderful nutrients in plant food.
Yes.
And so what are some of your favorite anti-cancer plant foods? Like, what are the ones that, you know, you feel like these are the staples, these are the ones you just want to get in your body in copious amounts?
Well, there's so many of them, and I've outlined them in my books, 12 Keys to a Healthier Cancer Patient, Beating Cancer with Nutrition. But let's get specific. Dark green leafies. Get as much of that into you as you can. And it's not just from the folate, which the word folate comes from foliage, as in dark green leafies. So Mother Nature's methylfolate is different than the folic acid that's artificially added into grains. That's a very different substance. Dark green leafies, colorful fruits. I'm talking about dark purple. The berries are very rich in anti-cancer nutrients. Now we get into it's fall, it's autumn, it's October, beautiful time of the year. You live in a part of the country where fall foliage is plethora, abundant. What's happening is in green trees, you have chlorophyll, which is green. And as the angle of the sun changes and the trees and the plants say it's starting into winter, it's time to go into hibernation, the chlorophyll is no longer regenerated, and so it dies back and it reveals the colors of the bioflavonoids and carotenoids that were there all of the time. So those orange, red, and yellow that makes up a beautiful fall day was there all the time, except it was masked by the green chlorophyll. So when you look at, there's thousands of bioflavonoids, thousands of carotenoids. For instance, there one study from Gladys Block at UC Berkeley, she said there's over 300 studies showing that a diet rich in fruits and vegetables lowers your risk for cancer, period, beyond argument. And yet from that, the doctor said, well, let's just pick one of those carotenoids. They picked beta carotene. And from that, they said, we're going to make a artificial form of it, all trans beta carotene, and we're going to wrap it into a pill that has coal tar as a color so that you can't tell the difference between the placebo and the active agent. And they gave it to people who've been smoking for 40 years, and it didn't help. And from that, they said beta carotene must be harmful.
I think the people in that study actually got a little worse, right?
Oh, yeah.
Didn't they do worse given that synthetic beta carotene?
Right. So from that, the doctors, and this is, Chris, where we get misinformation, fake news, where you have a good friend of mine, Alan Gaby, is an MD, has a master's degree in nutrition, brilliant guy. He's got a book, Nutritional Medicine. It's about 1,500 pages. He's got 13,000 references in it, and it's rich in nutrient, the information from peer-reviewed literature. Do you ever see anything like that in the news? No. But if a study comes out saying that beta carotene actually made smokers worse, it's all around the news. And so they very selectively take anything that makes nutrition look counterproductive and broadcast it. And the net effect in the public is, well, the experts can't make up their mind. Just pour me another beer, honey. And that's how people they're reluctant.
Yeah, and you know, talk about fake news. I know there have been a few blurbs from that study and a handful of others that circulated around the globe and were sort of distilled down into this bad advice that doctors are repeating and saying, like, oh, you know, antioxidants, or in the media too, antioxidants make cancer spread, right? This kind of thing. Because I know there was a similar study done with vitamin E, a synthetic vitamin E that. Right. And so I get this question all the time, right? Because people will stumble across some article that's saying like, oh, beta carotene and vitamin E are bad for cancer patients. And without the context and understanding the study that, no, they didn't feed them a bunch of carrots,
Right.
right? That they
And
fed them.
Mother Nature never puts one antioxidant in a food. It puts this entire army of antioxidants. And
Right.
when they go into the body, they're playing teamwork. It's a full court press. What they're doing is playing hot potato with the free radicals until the energy is dissipated. So there's a reason why there's thousands of carotenoids and thousands of bioflavonoids, because that's how we're supposed to eat whole food.
What are some of the favorite, or maybe favorite's the wrong word, but we'll just go with it. What are some of your favorite discoveries at the molecular level on how certain compounds, let's say green tea or beta carotene or ellagic acid, some of those compounds are interacting in the body or with cancer cells?
It is dazzling, Chris, when you start looking at how Mother Nature works. I'm not here to preach anybody, I'm teaching, but you look at how the whole system was built. We are built to be able to prevent and reverse cancer, and that comes from a whole food diet. Starting with, I mentioned fiber in the gut, and how what that is doing is upregulating cytokines that are on the intestinal lumen. Now what you have is immune augmentation coming from something as useless as fiber. The immune system, basically about 60 to 70% of the immune system is in surrounding the gut, because we literally have a septic tank within us. And so Mother Nature said, we're going to have to protect ourselves. We're going to have an army surrounding that septic tank, and that is an important part of our immune system. I look at, where do I start? Garlic, turmeric. Let's do that one. A yellow pigment that's found in mustard and curry, and the data on how turmeric affects the cells at a molecular level, down-regulating cancer at the DNA level, as an antioxidant, as an anti-inflammatory. One of the more fascinating ways is how nutrition affects the ends of our DNA. So literally changing the aging process of the human body. All of this is done by this. I just have to stand back sometimes and say, this is magical. But it's 2 million years time tested. So we are built for health. We're supposed to be lasting 80, 100 years, maybe more, if we follow the paradigm, which is eat Mother Nature, eat God's food, and you'll be surprised at the miracles that occur. Green tea, garlic, turmeric, ellagic acid. You mentioned vitamin E. Let's stop there. Vitamin E, there are at least 4 different tocopherols, and that's vitamin E, alpha, beta, gamma, delta, lambda tocopherols. But then there's 4 cousins tocopherols, and those are tocotrienols. So what happened is the biochemist, they looked at vitamin E, and the first studies that they did on animals, they found toco means fertility. So they found if you took vitamin E out of a rat's diet, it would not breed. No, there's no offspring. So they put it back in the diet, and they would have some offspring. That fertility, toco. And then they said, well, but we're going to take vitamin E out of a human diet. And they took students, healthy students, took vitamin E out of their diet for a year, and they noticed no difference. And what happens is long-term deficiencies of a whole assortment of nutrients leads to this cascade event that eventually it results into diabetes, heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's, chronic kidney disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. But back to vitamin E. There's at least 4 different types of vitamin E, and at least 4 kissing cousins that are tocopherols. And when they took one of those and turned it into a racemer, which is a mirror image because it was cheaper to make, and they fed those to people and said, that didn't help at all. You're right. You're not feeding Mother Nature's approach to this, because what happens is you have inhibitors. So when you feed a synthetic version of vitamin E to someone at the expense of these other 7 cousins, what you've done is inhibited the absorption and metabolism of those other natural compounds. And that's where whole grains are a good source of vitamin E. White flour has none. This is where I just stand back and my eyes light up and think, this is brilliant. The design, the orchestration is magnificent. We're built for health, Chris. Up until 1900, cancer was rarely mentioned in the medical literature. I mean, people had it, a rare lump or bump, but now 24% of deaths are from cancer. It was 1% in the year 1900. We are built to be able to prevent, to recognize, and destroy cancer. Bruce Ames, PhD at UC Berkeley. Bruce did work where he looked at DNA damage. And what they could do is they collect the byproducts of DNA damage in the urine. And they said, based upon our studies, every cell in your body, now there's about 37 trillion cells in an adult body. He said, every cell takes about 5,000 DNA hits per day. What you've got is, imagine an F5 hurricane, and you're standing on the roof and you have to nail the shingles back on as they're being ripped off, and the body knows how to do that. So there's a DNA polymerase, there's a correction device. The methylating nutrients of B12 and folate are among the nutrients that help correct the damage to the DNA to make sure it doesn't become cancer. We're built for health, and nutrition is an important part of that.
And without the right nutrition, with nutritional deficiencies, that inhibits or limits your body's ability to repair, regenerate, detoxify, and heal, right? And so
Absolutely.
This is what we've got. We've got an epidemic of malnutrition. And when people think of malnutrition, they think about, back in the 80s and the ads of starving children in Ethiopia. But that's not the kind of malnutrition that we are dealing with in the Western world. We're dealing with a population of people on multiple continents now that are overfed. They're obese, overweight and obese, but they are chronically malnourished, and because they're eating a diet that's really high in empty calories, right?
Right. And that's why we are so far off base with the standard American diet, or the SAD. If you look at the most commonly eaten food in America is white bread. The most common beverage is coffee. You look at 2 out of 3 Americans are overweight. Half of them, or 1/3 of Americans, are medically obese. And all the politicians are saying is, who's going to pay for this? I'm going to give you an analogy. What happens if I go into the office and I slam my thumb in a filing cabinet? First thing Monday morning, slam my thumb. Boy, that hurt. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I keep doing the same thing. And now my thumb is black and blue and swollen and bloody and painful. And I go to the doctor A, who says, I'm going to give you pain medication so you can better tolerate it. And I go to Dr. B, who says, we're going to give you anti-inflammatories, corticosteroids to reduce the swelling. And Dr. C says, I think we should cut it off because it looks defective. And of course you say, well, that's ridiculous. The answer is stop slamming your thumb in the desk drawer. Most Americans are slamming their thumb in the desk drawer euphemistically every day, all day, with their lifestyle. So those 6 factors that I mentioned, we haven't even touched on attitude. And the Center for Disease Control and the National Institutes of Health agree that at least 90% of all illness is related to stress, mental illness of some sort. But we look at attitude, nutrition, toxins, energy alignment, exercise, microbiome. Most Americans get an F- on their report card. And that's why I say I'm so admirable of what you're doing there. Let's get a ground break. More people listen to you and they get well and they tell their neighbor, and the neighbor says, well, maybe I can get rid of these 6 prescription drugs. The average American is on 1 prescription drug per decade of life. Now, let me talk to you about nutrition. We haven't even mentioned intermittent fasting. Let me give you some numbers on diabetes. 30 million Americans are diabetic. 60 million more, that makes 90 million total, are pre-diabetic. Diabetes is an awful, insipid disease that eventually ends up eroding the vision, the kidneys, the blood vessels. These people die of gangrene, blindness, kidney failure, etc. It's an awful disease, and it's pernicious. It's incessant. It keeps relentlessly moving through the body unless you correct it. There's a very bright doctor, Jason Fung, who was a diabetologist, and he found it very frustrating working with these obese patients, trying to figure out how am I going to schedule a kidney transplant for all these people. He found out intermittent fasting. All you got to do is stop eating for a while. And what's happening in Americans, Chris, is we eat too much and too often and the wrong food. Strike 3. And in doing so, here's what's happening. This cell keeps getting hit continuously with sugar and insulin, and eventually the cell membrane becomes insulin resistant. And that's the beginning of diabetes, heart disease, syndrome X, etc. What's the cure? Well, first you have to eat the right foods and less of it. But a big part of that is fasting. We're built to fast. Most major religions in the world have fasting as part of their celebrations. Dr. Fung and many others have proven beyond argument you can reverse almost all type 2 diabetes and almost all obesity with simply intermittent fasting, which means what I do, today's my fasting day, I try to narrow the window of what I'm eating. 8 hours a day I can eat, 16 hours a day I don't eat. So that's narrowing the window of feeding. And then 1 day a week, 24 hours, no food, nothing but water, tea, something like that. It's simple. And from my own perspective, I went from, I'm lean, healthy, I follow my own advice. My fasting blood glucose was running high, 95, 100. I did a lot of things to try and eliminate, including vegan, including some expensive supplements. None of it worked. I did intermittent fasting. Within 3 weeks, my fasting blood glucose is down to 67. It's an A+. And so what we find is eating and fasting are like the notes on a sound score. I want you to think about when you're looking at Beethoven or Brahms or Bach's a sound score, there's notes and there's spaces between the notes. And it's not just what you eat and how much and when, it's the space between the notes that will generate health. Now think about this. I mentioned earlier in our discussion, junk food and all of these toxic things are about $1 trillion a year industry. Weight loss is another $300 billion a year industry. Drugs is another $450 billion a year industry. Do you think you're ever going to see anything on the fake news that says, stop eating 1 day a week? Watch what it does for your health, because that would crush all of those industries. And you know what it cost you? Nothing.
Cost you nothing.
This is the beauty of what you and I are doing, Chris.
Some of the most powerful therapies you can do for yourself cost you nothing. Most of them, in fact. And, your mindset doesn't cost you anything. Eating healthy doesn't cost you anything when you stop wasting money on junk food. Fasting doesn't cost you anything.
Exercise?
Yeah, exercise is free. Yeah,
Yes.
This is a very empowering message, and I appreciate you so much because, it's neither you or I are trying to beat people up or make them feel bad about their choices. No. But there is the old expression, the truth hurts, right? The truth is, hey, maybe you've been contributing to your disease, right? And if you're willing to accept that as a possibility, then that unlocks this whole different process of thinking, which is, if I contributed to this, maybe I can contribute to the solution, right?
It's about empowerment. If you drove the car into the ditch and now you realize, I'm in charge, I'm driving, I'm not going to do that again. There's a great quote Robert Louis Taylor said, eventually, we all sit down to a banquet of consequences.
I love that quote. It's right. And the banquet is, it's all the food that you've grown, right? You've either sown seeds of disease or seeds of health, and you're going to have a harvest.
And I grow my own food. I'm blessed to have a third of an acre in Southern California. The weather's good enough that I can grow food almost 12 months of the year. Right now I've got golden nugget loquats that are coming in abundance, cherry tomatoes, spinach, lots of good food that I can eat from potatoes, purple potatoes. So I encourage people, plant-based diet. Support your local farmer group. If you have a farmer's market, a lot of people now have these cooperatives where the farmers in the nearby area put together their produce and they'll sell it. You get sort of this mixture, a basket of mystery produce, but it's good. Yeah. And you pay $40 a month and you get something every week. Support those people. You'd be surprised the changes in your health. I'm telling you, Chris, my mind is sharper than when I was in college, and I was not doing this stuff when I was in college. So you can prevent cancer, Alzheimer's, heart disease, diabetes. All of these things are primarily self-inflicted through lifestyle. There is a genetic component there, but I'm sharing with your people the same message you have is take control of your life. Would you rather be sick or well? Eventually, you can pay me now or pay me later. Which would you rather do?
Well, you mentioned genetics and epigenetics earlier, and it reminds me of this quote that I repeat often, and I know you've heard it and probably repeated it, but that, your genetics may load the gun, but diet and lifestyle pull the trigger. And lifestyle doesn't just mean, drinking, drugs, lack of exercise, and smoking, right? It also your stress, right? Lifestyle and stress are intertwined, and so these are things that we've got to get a handle on in order to change our life. So let me ask you, because we've got a few minutes left. I'd love to know what you say to a cancer patient when you were working in clinical setting, or even now, when you first meet with a cancer patient. What is your pitch to them for nutrition? What does that sound like?
Most cancer patients have had a diagnosis of cancer and a prognosis of how long they're going to live, something like that. Stage 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, A, B, whatever. Most of them come to me say, well, my doctor said I've got mesothelioma, I have got cancer from asbestos exposure, and they said I've got 2 years to live, and if I don't do what they say, I'm going to die. And I tell them that the doctor is right if you keep doing what you've been doing. So in other words, that SEER data, surveillance, epidemiology, and result, what they're saying is if you keep doing the same lifestyle that got you into this mess, then you will die right on time. What if we can change those numbers? What if we can improve the odds? And inevitably, these people come back saying, my doctor says, I don't know what you're doing, but keep doing it. So the people who wake up and say, I'm on a fork in the road, I can follow what the doctor said, and I will get the exact outcome or prognosis that the doctor said. An example, David Servan Schreiber was an MD, PhD, who was inadvertently diagnosed with brain cancer. And being an MD, he thought, well, I better do the medical stuff. Well, he was told, you got 2 years to live at best. So he did his own research and found nutrition played an important part in this. Ended up writing his own book, an anti-cancer lifestyle. And he said, the American diet is fertilizer for cancer. So I'm back to your question. What do I tell patients? If you keep doing what you've been doing, you will get the outcome that your doctor said. What if we can change the course? What if we can change the way your body works internally and your body can recognize and destroy the cancer?
And yet some people still do not want to change, do they?
Well, that's that fantasy. That's that hope, a naive reliance on modern medicine that somehow there is this Tinkerbell that's going to touch you with a magic wand. And even though you were told to get your affairs in order, something's going to happen, something magical that you can continue with your old lifestyle. So I don't criticize any of those people. I don't berate them. We all make choices in life. What I do is if you'd like to listen to me, fine. If not, I bless you on your way. But more and more people, we're 50 years into the war on cancer, Chris. And many cancers have increased. The 5-year survival for a stage 4 cancer has not changed one bit in 50 years. And by some estimates, we spent about $200 billion at the National Cancer Institute in research and about $2 trillion in the last 50 years on therapies. For instance, if you have just 30 seconds, I spoke at a conference in Atlanta. A beautiful lady came up to me, 70 years of age. She had my first version of Beating Cancer with Nutrition clutched in her arm. It was dog-eared, and she said, would you sign this for me? I'd be glad to. She said, 25 years ago, I was diagnosed with late-stage breast cancer. I got your book. I followed it. I'm in complete remission. I feel great. And I said, that's wonderful. We took a photo, wished her on her way. I have a friend who's an MD, PhD, an oncologist, both from Harvard. He's been an oncologist for 40 years. And I told him the story, and I said, but you've had a lot of anecdotes. I'm sure you've had a lot of patients who have had the same outcome. He said, none. None. So what I'm sharing with you, you tell people you can follow that exact course and things may not work out well. What do you have to lose? Things are pretty bad where you're at. So let's do something to improve things.
Yeah, I love that. It's like, you have nothing to lose and everything to gain, right?
Yes.
You're already losing, right? You're already
Right.
losing your life if you have an advanced cancer diagnosis. Like, it is slipping away. And so why not pull out all the stops? Why not radically change your life in every way possible and do everything that you can do to support your body's ability to heal? that is your message. It's also my message. And it is one of, hopefully, I mean, if we're doing it right, it's a message of hope and empowerment. And it is really remarkable. And like you, I do, I get the same type of feedback from folks that have read my book and followed me and who say, thank you, you saved my life. And I'm like, hey, look, I'm just trying to shine a light in the dark.
Good.
Right.
Good,
I've been down that road. I've been through the dark, been through the jungle, and I'm just trying to shine a light for folks, because I've never cured anyone. I can't cure anyone, but I can show people the way and show them how to change. And I'm just so thankful to you because, researchers like you helped educate me on the value of nutrition and the fact that it's real because I didn't talk about this in our interview, but when I was diagnosed, when I decided to go hardcore, plant-based, all raw, just overdose on fruits and vegetables and change my life, I didn't have any studies, okay? I had 0 studies. I had a couple books written by people who had survived cancer or some alternative health and natural type medicine doctor type people, Paul Bragg, George Malcolmus, Dr. Lorraine Day. Yeah. So I had books from some of these folks, and that was all I had, yeah. And I got well. And in the back of my mind, I was like, I don't know, am I just lucky? Was it a fluke? I don't really understand. I believed that the nutrition and everything I was doing was going to help me. I mean, I had no doubts about it. Of course, fear and doubt will creep in, but right. I believed it would help me. But then all of a sudden, years after my diagnosis and recovery, I started to dig into the science, and I'm like, whoa, yes. There's so much incredible science on turmeric, right? On green tea, on berries, on cruciferous vegetables, onions, garlic, basically almost every vegetable, every fruit, every herb and spice, they all have unique anti-cancer effects in the body. It's just so cool. So all that to say, thank you so much for the incredible work you've done, all the books you've published. You've reached countless people. You've influenced my life in a big way, and I'm paying it forward to the world. And it's just been a pleasure to know you. And thanks for taking the time to do this interview.
Well, it's been a real pleasure. It's teamwork, Chris. People like you and I who are making a difference, and I think people need to know. We can explain it now. Back in Max Gerson's day, it was folklore, folk remedies. We can't explain why it works. For almost 300 years, white willow bark was used to treat pain. Nobody knew why. How does it work? We don't know, but it works. Now we can explain why nutrition and this epigenetic program can reverse cancer in people, even with advanced cancer. So keep up the good work. We understand how it works. We're in an age of enlightenment.
Science is enlightening nutrition and natural therapies. It's wonderful.
It's a good era. Yes. Keep up the good work, Chris.
You too, sir. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Again, Dr. Patrick Quillin. You can find him at gettinghealthier.com. Are you on any social media?
All of them. Yeah. Facebook, Twitter, all of them.
And they can search for you, Dr. Patrick Quillin. Easy to find.
Yes.
And I hope you will. Again, another plug for two of his books that I'm familiar with, which is Beating Cancer with Nutrition, incredible volume of information, and then 12 Keys to a 12 Keys to a Healthier Cancer Patient is your latest, correct?
Yes.
Got it.
Coming out
on
with
Amazon.
A new version of Beating Cancer, but the evidence is overwhelming, Chris. A well-nourished cancer patient can better manage and beat the disease.
Perfect. Thanks, everybody. Please share this video with people you care about. This is important stuff. You can heal your body and your life if you're willing to change. That's it. Signing off. Thanks, Dr. Patrick Quillin. See you soon.
Thank you, Chris. A pleasure.